Welcome to BachTalk, Thinking Through Music, the podcast of the Bach Ensemble at St. Thomas. I'm Carlton Monroe. My guests today are violinist Evin Blomberg and cellist Ilya Finkelsteyn. Evin and Ilya are married and both play with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, in addition to numerous other musical endeavors. They will be presenting a concert sponsored by the Bach Ensemble on October 24th at 7:30 p.m. at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. Thank you, Evin and Ilya, for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. You're going to be performing our first program of our concert series this year with the Bach Ensemble on October the 24th. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about that program today, but also sort of want to get to know you a little bit better as musicians and maybe near the end of our conversation a little better as golfers too. And I'll get to that. I'll get to that later. So anyway, I want to start by asking you about any piece of music that you never tire of playing and you enjoy revisiting, and why is it? So Evin, is there a piece of music that fits that bill for you?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. It's just like, who's your favorite composer and why do you like the violin so much? I feel like my answer always changes depending kind of on like what season of life I'm in. But I guess one piece that I keep coming back to, and maybe don't play it as much as I would like to, but definitely love listening to it and love listening to recordings. And if I do get the chance to play it, I enjoy very much, is the Bach Chaconne. And that's kind of a piece that I feel like every time I come back to it, I've grown a little bit more as a musician or as a person through life experiences, and it totally changes my interpretation of it. And that's something that it's kind of fun to experience as a musician and just as a person in general, having a different perspective on something like that.
Well, that's such a rich and I would say thick piece, right? There's so many
Oh, yeah.
aspects to it that there's so much to come back to. It's funny that you mentioned that piece because literally later today I am doing a Zoom presentation about Bach chorales and how
Mhm.
Bach used chorales to convey extra musical meaning, especially in instrumental music. I don't know if you're aware of this recording by the Hilliard Ensemble from several years ago of the Chaconne. They basically, a musicologist found out that much of the Chaconne was based off of the chorale Kriegslag and Todesbanden. Do you know this?
No, I didn't know
Oh my
that at
gosh.
all. Wow.
It's
Okay.
fascinating. Basically the recording, it's not really designed for concert performance, but this choir overlaid sections of this Bach chorale on the Chaconne and showed how its structures were similar. I was literally listening to that
Wow.
piece 15 minutes ago. So,
See the piece, it just unfolds in so many ways and I keep learning about it and that's fascinating. So next time I go back to it, I'll have
oh my
to look
gosh,
into
yeah,
that.
it's incredible. Ilya, what about you? Is there a piece like that for you?
Well, it is interesting that we're talking about Bach, but Bach seemed to be the composer that I come back to, and it's not a particular piece, it's just a set of all the six suites and even the sonatas for, although written for viola da gamba, but often played on a cello with a harpsichord. But it seems like the six suites is such a, how shall I say it, a musical Bible for musicians in general and for cellists especially, that yeah, Evan was absolutely right that at different times of our life and different moments of our lives, coming back to that kind of music, everything sounds different, means different things, keep on discovering uh, different meanings. And so it is something that we always go back to.
I think I'm always amazed. I mean, I would argue that the partita the Chaconne is from is maybe the most significant solo violin works ever written, and of course the cello suites are similar. There's something about Bach's music that seems so foundational to everything that has come
Yeah.
since, and I think that may be part of the reason that we keep returning to it. Is there, on the flip side of that, is there a composer, and I guess it's not going to be Bach for any of us, who you think is maybe a little underrated? Like a composer that you love, who you maybe doesn't think has the same widespread appeal as a Mozart or a Bach? Or...
Well, I actually, just to be a devil's advocate, I was going to say Bach as well.
Oh, okay. Tell me.
Because for about 70 plus years, he was considered underrated, old-fashioned, too learned, too complicated, and completely did not fit into the mold of the new way of thinking. You just mentioned Mozart, music of Mozart and Clementi and Alberti bass on the bottom. That's what people were yearning for. And all of a sudden, a composer such as that all of a sudden went into the background completely. And so not until, I don't remember exactly the year, 1829, the St. Matthew Passions were sort of premiered by Mendelssohn conducting. But the cello suites were actually not popular until the beginning of 20th century. So there we have, almost 150 years plus of a greatest, or what we consider one of the greatest composers ever, that was not very popular with cellos.
Were
The
they just
suites were,
considered etudes
yeah,
or
they were
exercises?
performed right as separate pieces, never as a whole suite, and were given to students as exercises. So that kind of feeling of foundational way of looking at it was very foundational in terms of learning the cello, learning to get around the cello. So for that long, that composer was completely forgotten and dismissed.
So
Yeah,
it,
it's the same actually with the violin partitas and sonatas. I think it took not that long, but it took a little while for them to kind of catch on too.
that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Evan, you're going to play the G minor sonata on the
Hmm.
program, right? Um,
Yes.
Tell me about your approach to that piece, or your feelings about that piece. What drives your interpretation of that?
So the violin sonatas and partitas, I feel like each one has such a different and distinct character. And the what we were talking about earlier with the chaconne being so dramatic, I think there were some hints of that started out in the first sonata. It feels very dramatic and grand, and um, going through the first movement is just all of these really rich chords and really intricate embellishments. And I really enjoy kind of, it feels like opening the curtain to a big stage, and then you get the rest of the sonata after that. So it's it's a lot of fun to kind of create drama out of a piece that's, hundreds of years old.
Do you find you play that piece differently every time you perform it, or are there things that you stick with no matter what? Or
Absolutely. And I think because it's the first one in the set, that's often the one that gets given to students a lot. So
okay,
I remember when I first learned it way back as a student, a lot of the focus was kind of on technique and using it as an exercise and building, intonation foundation with the chords and the double stops. And now that I feel more comfortable with the technical side of playing it, I am finding myself kind of exploring a lot more of the musical side and artistic side, and not just what seems appropriate um, to play as music of Bach or Baroque music, but also just kind of what style do I want to bring to it as an artist myself.
okay, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask both of you. That's a great point. I'm curious about how you, first of all, as you all know, the Bach Ensemble, we're performing cantatas. Our kind of, the phrase we use is historically informed performances. We play at A440. We don't play at Baroque pitch. We play on modern instruments, but we do try to keep a Baroque sensibility about the way we approach the music. how do you balance that kind of historical information that we have with a modern emotional performance? Ilya, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the Bach, as probably most of the composers, had an absolute um, open mind and looking for new ways of creating harmonies, sounds. And so when one looks at, I'll stick with my repertoire, the cello suites. The first four out of six were written just for cello, which at the time was actually a fairly new instrument. It was not super popular. That's why in one of the Brandenburg concertos, Bach uses cellos and viola da gambas together. But then for the last two suites, he is looking for something new. So he's in the fifth suite, we're using what's called a scradatura, or tuning down one of the strings, and thus creating extra overtones. And in the sixth suite, it was actually written for a cello piccolo, which would have five strings. So one extra string on top the E string, just like the violin. So just from knowing that, we know, I think that he was looking for some different type of expressions. And while, from all our work with new composers and contemporary composers, looking at how great composers have developed from Beethoven to Mozart, from their beginning of the career to the end of their career, it seems like they were not bound by the time that they lived in. And so um, I don't particularly feel that we have to be bound by a certain idea of how pieces should be performed, especially that we don't have an absolute records of that time. There are some documents written, and Leopold Mozart would write things about particular performing. You know, I like that you call it historically informed performance, because that gives uh, a way to uh, exploring, a contemporary or a modern way of playing. But because very often people say, well, in that time you should not use vibrato and such. And we know that Leopold Mozart, the father of Wolfgang, already wrote that vibrato has to be used just tastefully.
Right.
Um, so I feel like because we're not playing the instruments of the time, and our instruments have been, the string instruments especially, been recontoured to the modern times and the modern demands of the contemporary nowadays, modern halls with metal strings and higher tension and such. It already is a different instrument, and it doesn't, it would be silly to find a type of sound that the instrument simply does not support. We also know that at the time of Bach, for instance, the standard A was not standard.
Right.
From town to town, they went anywhere from, I think it was like 415 to 452 or so. I mean,
Wow.
it was all over the place. So um, again, for instance, my cello does not sound great in the contemporary setting that it is now. If you go to 415, it really loses a
Hmm.
lot of it. So 440 or 441 seems like a standard nowadays. Now, the sensibility of playing Bach, meaning paying attention to the harmonies, knowing what symbolic things were used, what type of language he uses as a composer, I think that is an absolute, but that would be the case for performing any composer. But in Bach's case, sorry if I'm talking too much,
No, no, no.
uh,
It's great.
but the particular pieces that we're playing were all written, within, 3, 4 years while he lived in Curtin, and most of the time he did not write any sacred music there.
Right.
he didn't have to. He was told that he could explore secular music, and that's why there was this explosion of um, everything from orchestra suites to Brandenburg concertos to solo repertoire for violin and the cello and the keyboard. And but I don't think his musical language changed all that much. So while the pieces are secular, I think the language itself is not all that different from
Yeah,
the cantatas and oratorios.
I agree.
Mhm.
Just one more note from my perspective on the historical performance practice from a choral conductor. If we were to be historically accurate, there would be no female voices, right? It would be
Right.
boys and
Yeah.
male voices, and there aren't too many groups today that would be willing to make that the exclusive method of performing the cantatas. Similarly, because when you're performing with modern instruments, just because modern instruments are louder than historic instruments, it's harder to sing one on a part cantatas, which we know a lot of the cantatas were probably performed that way. And so we are able to do that occasionally in the Bach ensemble, but a lot of times we do have 8 singers, 16 singers, just to balance with modern instruments. And I don't think it really takes away anything from the piece at all or the performance of the piece. But it is interesting, all of those uh, choices that you have to make with some of the
Yeah.
modern changes. Evan,
Yeah.
Well, and
did you
sorry.
have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I also love the fact that you use historically informed.
Yeah.
That phrase is really great. And I think if Bach had known the potential of the instruments, centuries later, he would have been happy with the way that a lot of people have chosen to interpret the music that he wrote. And I think even in the way that it's written in the manuscript, for example, some of the pedal notes in the violin sonatas and partitas are written as like whole notes under these changing chords. If he had known that we could sustain now, I think he would actually enjoy the fact that a lot of musicians like to sustain and like to use vibrato to kind of hold those out. So I think in that way, understanding where the music came from and how to interpret it through our modern techniques and instruments, I think they would have been very happy with the way musicians play now.
Yeah, it's interesting when you study his liturgical music output, the cantatas, and we know exactly which cantatas were performed on which week and which year. You start to see that he was incredibly creative, but also incredibly practical. Meaning, if he had a musician in town, an outstanding trumpet player, you have a whole set of cantatas written in a row that have just fiendishly difficult trumpet parts, and it was
Oh,
only
wow.
because that particular trumpet player was in town at that point. And when he rewrote cantatas, he often substituted instruments based on the people that he had available to them. And I don't
Hmm.
think that that means that the music is any less meaningful, but it does demonstrate his willingness to make changes to the music based on the circumstances. And so I don't think he would be the kind of composer to, like Ilya said at the beginning, to accept limitations to any of these. He
Yeah,
would go with what's
exactly.
available. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But
So a couple.
also
Oh, go ahead.
another, sorry, one other little detail. The one of the pieces that he wrote, the Art of Fugue, does not specify any instruments at all.
Right. Right.
So could be performed on anything from voices to harpsichord, organ, strings, woodwinds. It doesn't matter. So that the medium then did not matter to him as much.
So with that in mind, I'm curious because I wanted to ask if there, and these may be very subtle differences, but are there differences with the way he wrote for violin and the way he wrote for cello? Um, are there any examples where you could say that he would? I mean, obviously, understanding the instrument and the range and the capabilities of the instrument. Is there any other differences to how he handled writing for string parts like that?
I was wondering that because the violin set is three sonatas and three partitas. So we have three of the more like traditional style, I guess, church sonatas, and then three dance suites. Where the cello works, it's six dance suites, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think maybe there were some limitations of the instruments considered in that. I'm not sure. What about from a cello perspective?
Well, so from the cello perspective, I think he realized that the cello itself, in the way it can be played, or at least could be played then, cannot be sustaining too well more than one line at a time. There are a lot of chordal uh, writing in the violin, or double stops, sometimes triple stops. With the cello, it's much more rare, so there's a lot more broken chords. Also, not much is used above fourth position, so playing in the thumb position, outside suite, which originally he actually wrote for an instrument that would have an extra string, so you wouldn't have to go to a thumb position. At the time, people did not play up there anyway. But we know from the instruments that were left after his passing that he actually had a cello and he had violins and he had keyboards. So he could play all those instruments. He was fairly familiar with capabilities of them, and then we all always know that composers are closely related to performers. So, like you said, if the trumpet player was a virtuoso and could play anything that difficult, he would just write for him. Perhaps he did not meet somebody who who could play incredibly difficult cello things, but we know Beethoven did and wrote very difficult things, and Brahms the same way. And so these connection between composers and performers is very important. So I wish I knew who were the cellists in the court at Curtin when Bach was there.
Hmm.
It's I think Bach, I mean, I am not a string player, so this is based on my experience talking with string players, but Bach definitely understood the facility of the instrument in a very special way. Um, he did not understand the facility of the voice in a similar way. And this is one of the great difficulties for singers trying to approach Bach, is that he really wrote instrumental lines for singers to perform. And there are clearly times, I think, in the vocal writing where he was thinking of a violin part and just was moving across the strings, and the voices just don't move in that same way. And that's one of the
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest challenges for singers, especially modern conservatory trained singers who are trained on bel canto singing and 19th century opera. They have to learn a whole new set of skills in order to translate that into Baroque singing, and especially Bach. Okay,
That's so interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's challenging. But it's great. It's good for singers too, because it actually forces them. Well, I think this is a compliment. It forces them to think a little more instrumentally about their approach to singing. So we've just got a few minutes left, but I wanted to move on to some fun topics too, because I know Ilya definitely plays golf. Evan, you play golf too, though, right?
I do play golf.
That's what
Yes.
I thought. Okay, so golf is, as Ilya knows for certain, is my secret passion. And so I had a couple of fun questions for you about this.
I didn't know it
So
was a secret passion. I
Yeah.
thought there's no secret about it.
yes, okay, fair enough, fair enough. So the first question is, I've always felt this, but I'm curious how you react to this. Do you see parallels between the golf swing, or playing golf in general, and music? Because I know many musicians that play golf and are in fact obsessed with golf. Evan, do you see parallels here?
Absolutely. And I think I'm probably the newest golfer out of this group here. I actually learned a little bit when I was younger because my dad knew how to play and he taught my sister and I how to swing, basically. But the first time I played on a golf course was with Ilya during the pandemic. And I definitely noticed a lot of parallels with the way we analyze things as musicians and try to analyze then everything on the golf course. But then at that point, you also have to accept that so much is out of your control, which as musicians, we don't do a lot. So it
Right.
actually helped me become a better musician. I'm a little better now at kind of letting things go.
Ah, that's really interesting. Okay. Ilya, what about you?
Well, so from just biomechanical point of view, I think uh, playing a string instrument, especially having your arms swinging, playing bow, and having a freedom of your in your posture is very close to the rotary movement of golf. From a mental perspective, I found golf always helped me in my audition or concerts, just kind of focusing on the very present, not thinking too far ahead.
Yep.
In golf, one shot at a time. I am learning how to let go. It's not always not always the case, but as I'm getting older, I'm starting to enjoy the fact of a well hit shot and accepting the outcome, whatever it
I was gonna
is.
say, you can't throw your bow after a bad
Yeah.
practice session, right? So,
No, no, no. Did
um,
not stop me from throwing clubs, though, I have to tell you.
yeah. So, okay, this is a fun one. Imagine J.S. Bach was a golfer.
Mhm.
What kind of golfer would he be? Could you describe him on the course? Either one of you, whoever wants to answer.
I want to imagine that he was the type of person who would throw a fit and
Yeah.
because the music is so like beautifully clean and well organized and I would love to see like Bach unhinged.
Yeah. I think he would be a tinkerer. Like I think he would
Yeah,
Yes.
be, bending his club, changing club angles, new grips, right? I think he would be trying all of that stuff.
Mhm.
yeah. And actually, I wonder, he might be an extremely boring person to talk to because he would be concentrating so much on
Oh
the
yeah.
perfection, you know?
He would not be
So,
engaging in small talk, right?
no, probably
No.
not.
Oh wow. Well, that was fun. Well, thank you both of you for joining me for this conversation. This is so wonderful, and I cannot wait to hear your program on October the 24th.
We are excited. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't wait.
Thanks for listening to Bach Talk, thinking through music from the Bach Ensemble at St. Thomas. Please subscribe and join us again for future episodes.